A certain magical index has the most confusing magic system I've ever seen. The power system I'm talking about is called magic. Esper powers make sense, magic not so much. I used to think that the author was just too smart for me, but his Esper abilities always made some degree of sense despite using more complicated science. As of now, I'm under the belief that 25% of the powers actually make sense, while the other 75% are intentionally made to be so confusing that we don't ask questions and accept whatever's happening. I decided to actually go through the major magicians in the arcs and actually do my best to understand how powers work and whether my initial theory is right. The core of all magic is supposed to be idol theory. Idol theory is the rule that all magic gets its powers from references to religious and mythological ideas. So if I have a cross necklace, that necklace will have some of Jesus' powers since it's a symbol that refers to him. Another core element that goes very underused is magic circles. They also use idol theory. The words and symbols inside the circles refer to where the power is being drawn from, like a specific angel or a specific element. Chanting and incantations can also use idol theory to create magic. These are supposed to be the main concepts, so let's go to the magicians. First up is Stiyl Magnus. I will be using the wiki to make sure I understand the powers to the fullest extent. Stiyl uses runes that he places on his cards. These runes allow him to use fire magic and other stuff, so already he's using his own subsystem. The wiki says that there are 24 runes, and each rune can have different meanings. Different runes can create different effects. Problem number 1. How does this relate to idol theory? What supernatural concepts are the runes drawing on? I don't know. Problem number 2. What each rune can do and what runes are even being used are mostly left unidentified. For Stiyl specifically, he uses 6 new runes and we've only identified 2 of them, Torch and Iser, which when combined mean Torch God. So this magic already dropped the ball, but it gets more confusing. Stiyl can do all sorts of things with fire alone. He can shoot fireballs, make swords of fire, create mirages, reconstruct faces, and summon a fire monster. For the fire sword, he has a chant alongside runes, but when looking at the chant, once again, I see no idol theory. Inokentius uses runes and a unique chant too, but again, no idol theory. And then for his other fire abilities, he just uses runes. How does he use different spells with the same runes? That's never really explained. So Styl's powers are just plain confusing and vague. He gets a fail. Next is Kaori Kanzaki. Some of her powers actually make sense based on their established rules. First is her stigma. She has unspecified bodily characteristics similar to Jesus, so this gives her superhuman prowess. That makes sense. The idol here is Jesus. She can also heal herself because Jesus resurrected from the dead. Once again, the power has a clear idol, specifically a story here, and it copies the powers from it. She can also use a rune to make a clearing field, like Stiyl, but I already covered runes. Next, she has St. Peter's interception spell, which is also called the anti-flight spell. This one makes sense too. It's based on a biblical story where Peter saw a man flying and asked the demons to let him go, which resulted in the man falling to his death. The spell has the user say the same phrase as Peter and ground any magician that is flying. Simple. The idol is a biblical story and the magic copies the powers from it by copying the phrase. With her sword, she can use a spell called Yuisen, which imbues her sword with magic and allows her to harm even angels. What's the idol? Not stated. She also has wire magic, which is where she uses wires and a 3D circle to cast spells. She can summon a god to protect the area, use fire and ice spells, and create a massive defense spell. None of the contents of these circles are disclosed, meaning it has no observable idol. She also has a move called Raikiri, which is based on the Japanese legend of Dosetsu, slicing through lightning. The spell allows her to cut electrical attacks. The idol is Dosetsu's story, and it replicates the powers from that story. Makes sense. So most of Kanzaki's powers make sense. She gets a pass. Next is Aureolus Izzard. His magic is an alchemy called Ars Magna. It allows him to make his thoughts a reality with great concentration. In order to use the spell, he needed 2,000 brainwashed students to use a Gregorian chant to chant the spell together. All those people chanting together allowed him to shorten the time limit normally required for the spell. The chant vaguely references Christianity because it references a type of music that was sung in churches rather than the actual Bible itself. So then how does it result in anything supernatural? I don't know. The chant is on the wiki, but how do the words result in any reality warping? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. He gets a fail. Next is Motoharu Tsuchimikado. His first spell is Red Spell. This uses the Chinese 4 symbols as a symbol with origami. The chant says something about a pistol and bullet, and then a large laser hits the location of the user. This doesn't follow the rules. What do the 4 symbols have to do with a gun or a laser? Then, Black Spell. This uses black origami to make a water projectile. I can let this slide because the black origami refers to Genbu, the black tortoise, and its element is water. Blue spell uses origami and chanting to form a shield. That doesn't make any sense. He has an unarmed spell that shoots a burning orange origami paper. Makes no sense. Then he has all-around reality circle. This uses 4 origamis and a piece of the target to create a map that shows where the target is. I will let this slide because the 4 symbols are associated with the 4 cardinal directions. Then divination circle. He uses colored paper for a magic circle, and the spell activates in response to magic power from an interception spell and calculates where the spell came from, the distance and the direction. That doesn't make any sense. Where's the idol? Then he has a water dragon spell. Using the dragon origami and chant, he created a water blast. Seryu's element is wood, not water, so this doesn't make any sense. His last spell is Ushi no Koku Mairi. This is based on a legend about nailing a doll with a person's hair onto a sacred tree to curse them. Motoharu is able to curse someone with this spell by taking a piece of them and chanting. I can let this slide. So that's 2 out of 7, that makes sense. He gets a fail. Next is Etzali. His first spell allows him to copy someone's appearance by cutting off their flesh and turning it into a charm through a ritual. This is based on the Aztec custom of eating human flesh to deliver it to heaven. Though the ritual is not defined, I can let this slide. Turning into a person isn't really supported by the Aztec ritual, but I can respect the effort. His main weapon is the spear of some god that I'm not going to try and pronounce. This is a replica of the actual Aztec god of Venus's weapon. It reflects light from Venus and destroys anything it touches. My research on this deity says that he uses darts, not a spear, and he has nothing to do with reflections or light. This one doesn't make sense. Then he has some Aztec grimoires that use the Aztec calendar as an idol. His first is time related to life and death. This makes anyone with a weapon kill themselves. The Aztec calendar does have death as one of the day signs, so I can let this slide. His second grimoire is Moon Rabbit. This allows the user to fire their bones as projectiles. The wiki says this is based on the story of the 5th sun's creation, which includes rabbits. If that were true, it would make sense. But how does a rabbit being thrown at the moon to weaken its glow turn into firing bones? The story of the 5th sun found on Wikipedia has little to do with bones. A god takes the bones of dead people and revives them with his blood. That still doesn't create a clear line of shooting your own bones. He gets a fail. Next is Ouma. He uses an Azusa Yumi, a bow used by Shinto priests in rituals. The bow can also be a musical instrument. Playing the bow will scare away evil spirits. That's the idol. What does Ouma do with the weapon? He can shoot air, metal balls, wind blades, use sonar sensing, turn invisible, and confuse people. Makes no sense. His rope binding magic is based on Shimenawa, which is a Shinto purification tool, and it allows him to create a magical boundary that can torture people. How did we go from purification to torture? His last spell vaguely combines Shinto and Buddhism and allows him to read minds. None of this lines up. He gets a fail. Sherry Cromwell is the last magician in Season 1. Her main spell is Golem Ellis. Strap in, because this is confusing. It is derived from Kabbalah idols. How? I don't know. The wiki doesn't say. It is also combined with Anglican spells. What spells? The wiki doesn't say. She also made the golem to react to the cross, whatever that means. She also made the golem look like an angel. This is the only idol theory that makes sense so far. The head, right arm, left arm, legs were all created in the image of a cross, each assigned with the power of the 4 archangels. I don't know what that means, but idol theory would dictate that the golem has some of the archangel powers, yet those are never shown. She uses magic chalk to create magic circles that summon the golem out of her surroundings. What makes the chalk magic and what goes into her magic circles? We don't know. There's more like moving the golem, mud eyes, automatic writing, and levitation, but the wiki and probably the author doesn't even put in effort to explaining the idol theory for most of it, so I won't bother. The wiki says, by drawing a magic circle in the air through the alignment of the 4 archangels that are represented in the limbs of the golem, Sherry can force it to move, which is idol theory, but the sentence is too vague to make sense. She gets a fail. So out of 7 characters in Season 1, only 1 character got a pass, 14%. All of the other magician spells don't make sense based on the rules the story established. Because of this, I'm going to start going faster instead of wasting my time dissecting the powers just for it to not make sense. If you want more context, you can read or watch the story or read the wiki. Season 2. First, Tatemiya Saiji. He has a flamberge sword that allows him to suppress fire. There's no idol theory here. That's a fail. Next, Itsuwa. Her first spell is Saint Destroyer. It's a spell that only works on saints and briefly paralyzes them. The idol is her spear, a reference to the Lance of Longinus, which stabs Jesus, a saint, on the cross. So this spell is the weakness of saints. That checks out. It worked even better on Aqua because he was a saint that had the attributes of Mary, who was also regarded as a saint. The rest of her spells don't even try to use idle theory, for the most part. The mass-based cutting spell tries something, but it doesn't make sense. She gets a fail. She has one spell that makes sense, and 12 that don't. I could have given her some leeway if Saint Destroyer was used way more than the others, but it's used once. Next, Agnese Sanctis. She uses the Lotus Staff. What she does with the staff is replicated on the opponent. Banging the staff creates blunt force attacks, cutting it creates slicing attacks. There's also an unexplained delay. The idle theory mentions the 4 elements, but it doesn't actually make sense. She has some other spells that don't make sense, at least with how the wiki explains the idle theory. Next, Angeline. She has coin bags, referencing Apostle Matthew, who was a tax collector. After chanting, the bags turn into winged projectiles. This doesn't make sense. They aren't even referencing a specific story. They turn into attacks just because. She gets a fail. Next, Lucia. Her idol theory is based on a wheel that was used to execute saints. When the wheel was touched by Saint Catherine, it exploded and killed all the executioners and spectators. Her magic is a wheel that can explode into splinters and reform. Makes sense. She gets a pass. Next is Oriana Thompson. She might be the worst offender with shorthand. Here's how the wiki explains it. She mixes the symbols and colors of the 4 elements in Western magic. The use of incompatible colors allows for a reaction that Oriana can use to attack. What are the symbols and colors, and what do they mean? How did the unique combinations result in specific spells? Who knows? The idol theory is so vague too. She has so many random spells with shorthand and it just doesn't add up. She gets a fail. Next, Biagio Busoni. He has 3 spells. St. Margaret's Crucifix is based on a story where the titular saint was swallowed by a dragon and expanded her cross to stab from inside. This spell allows him to expand crucifixes. Checks out. Next is Weight of the Cross. The idol is tales relating to the weight of the cross, and the cross being a symbol of humility. The spell multiplies the weight of the crucifixes. Checks out. His last spell is Simon carrying the cross. The idol is Simon helping Jesus carry the cross. The spell forces an invisible weight on the enemy. Checks out. He's the first character with a perfect score. He gets a pass. Last in Season 2 is Vento of the Front. Her first spell is Divine Punishment. The idol is that Jesus was pierced by steel nails with a hammer. The spell is casted by having several metal piercings and a hammer as a weapon to mimic Jesus' body on the cross. The effect is that anyone who bears ill will towards her will be rendered unconscious. The effect doesn't really line up, but everything else does, so I'll let it slide. She also has a wind hammer spell. Using her hammer, she hits the chain hanging from her tongue to attack with wind projectiles in unexplained trajectories. That doesn't add up. Where's the idol theory? I gotta give her a fail because she uses wind hammer more than divine punishment. That's all the major magicians in Season 2. Out of 8 characters, only 2 got a pass, 25%. The overall is 19.5%. Not looking good. Terra of the Left is the first in Season 3. His spell is Execution of Light. The IT is that during Mass, wine is the blood of God and bread is the flesh of God. Additionally, it uses the idea that Jesus' death only made sense because the order of precedence was changed so that he could be killable. He uses a blade of flour to represent the flesh of God. This spell allows Terra to change the precedence or hierarchy of things by speaking it into existence. If he puts flour above human flesh, flour can cut humans. If he puts his clothes above weapons, his clothes can't be broken. The flour blade is explained as a byproduct of the spell, allowing him to change the shape of flour. The flour weapon doesn't make complete sense, but everything else does, so he gets a pass. Next, Aqua of the Back. He's a saint, like Kanzaki. The IT is vague, but it checks out. He also has Divine Mother's Mercy, which allows him to use 100% of his saint powers, but the IT is not explained. That's not good. It also allows him to use regular spells, unlike the members of God's Right Seat. He can use some other minor spells like water-based ones, but they don't make sense and have no IT. His main abilities are being a super saint thanks to Jesus and Mary, so I'll give him a pass. Next, Lessard. She has some spells and equipments. None of them even try to have IT. She gets a fail. Next, Carissa. She has a weapon called Cortana Original. This allows her to represent the leader of angels, Michael, and empower herself and her knights. What characteristics allow the weapon to imitate Michael? Who knows? She can also cut dimensions to summon dimensional debris, which looks like giant cubes in the anime. She gets a fail. Next, Knight Leader. He has the spell of Thoron. What it does is irrelevant because it has no IT. His weapon is Runting. It's from the legend of Beowulf, where the sword became sharper and tougher from the blood of slain enemies. This sword allows Leader to use Telesma, basically mana, to substitute as blood in order to increase his power. He also has Pattern Magic, which allows him to analyze the patterns of different mythologies and add them into his attack patterns to create new spells. Examples are Gungnir, Mjolnir, Fragarach, and Bryanak. How any of these apply to his specific spells is unspecified, but I'll do research to see if it adds up. Gungnir has great aim and power. Mjolnir has great power and lightning. Fragorach could force victims to tell the truth, control wind, and cut anything. Bryonak was just a spear. Using pattern, Leader has 7 spells. Cutting through anything and destructive power makes sense. Ranged attacks could be justified by Fragorach. Indestructibility could be justified by the power of all of these weapons. Precise accuracy and special use don't make sense. But there's a big problem. What exactly is Leader analyzing to create these spells? Unknown. He gets a fail. Lastly, Fiamma of the Right. Fiamma's IT is the right hand of Jesus that is used to perform miracles. This spell is called the Holy Right and is said to do a bunch of nonsense, but I'll only cover what he actually does in the story. It manifests as a third arm that looks like a talon and can be used to attack. He has a strike that ends everything, a strike that reaches everything, a flaming sword, a beam of light, a sword of light, teleportation, and mental communication. Does this make sense? No. What about Fiamma allows him to mimic the right hand? With Stigmata, it's at least explained that the saints have the physical characteristics of Jesus. This ability doesn't even attempt to explain it. As for the specific abilities, I can actually let that slide because the right hand performs miracles. The miracles don't have to appear a specific way or do a specific thing, so all of his moves could be explained as miracles. The IT is very poor, so he gets a fail. In Season 3, out of 6 characters, 2 passed. That's 33%. Overall is now 24%. That makes my prediction accurate, and this is only about a third of the entire story. More magic comes and it makes less and less sense. In conclusion, Toaru's magic doesn't follow its established rules and often relies on vagueness to get by. His grading actually works in Toaru's favor because instead of counting each spell, I'm counting each character. If I counted each spell that did or didn't make sense, the percentage would be far lower, yet Toaru still only has 24% making sense. This is a stark contrast to Esper powers, which usually make a lot of sense and have a lot of attention to detail. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.